Weaving their way through the landscape, our freshwater habitats are depended upon by everything. They are bringers of life, of great power and peace, and support all that live on land and in water. Renowned for their epic migrations and unique life cycles, salmon and sea trout are iconic symbols of a wild Britain. Connecting marine and freshwater ecosystems, they are sentinels of change and keystone species in our rivers. Beginning their lives in freshwater, they remain in these systems for at least a year, until they've undergone a transformation called smolting, which adapts their physiology for salt water and an epic journey ahead. They then embark on one of the greatest migrations on Earth, journeying through a network of rivers and out to feeding grounds at sea, where they will remain until they are ready to return to their natal river to spawn. As they return, they bring with them a wealth of nutrients that support a vast web of life. These magnificent fish also have huge significance both culturally and economically, with communities and individuals relying on them for their livelihoods.
Fishing is my life, and it has been for a long time now. For me, it's the process of fishing that captured me. You know, it's the unknown. It's the mystery underneath the water. Fishing has definitely been my form of therapy over the years, and for me, that's almost my meditation.
But as human pressures deplete the health of our rivers, and a changing climate results in extremes in flow and rising water temperatures, our fish are struggling.
The rivers of the UK are physically damaged. They're, you could say, broken, and they have been so for more than 1,000 years. So we've got an awful lot of work to try and undo that physical harm. Straightened and dredged ditch-like rivers are not good places for wildlife. They don't function naturally, and they're not good for the trout or indeed any of the other wildlife that live in or around them.
And today, over 1/3 of our fish species are listed as endangered. Atlantic salmon, once abundant in our waters, were declared as endangered in Britain in 2023, a heartbreaking symbol of the devastating decline our fish are suffering.
So our salmon populations are in absolute crisis at the moment. In the last 20 years, they've declined by 70%, and at the current rate of decline, we could lose them completely within 20 years.
And as their very existence is threatened, so too are the lives of all those that depend upon them.
If salmon were lost, from a biological or ecological perspective, it would be horrendous, but also, from a cultural perspective, this is an iconic species that plays a part in many people's lives and has done for thousands of years.
I have witnessed on certain rivers where salmon and sea trout fishing has been such a big part of that place, and the numbers decrease so much that they have totally lost that community altogether.
I looked at the IUCN Salmon Action Plan only yesterday, and that starts with the line, the IUCN salmon are in crisis and will shortly be extinct.
I'm not hopeful for the future of our wild populations of fish, because even when we have people screaming and shouting at the top of their voices, we're not being heard. And unless things change dramatically, I do fear for the future of our rivers.
At the moment, the estimate is that of all the juvenile salmon smolts leaving our river, only 2% are making it back from the sea. So if you compare that to figures back in the 60s, it was more like 40%. So we're seeing a massive decline in marine survival. What we need to do is look at that freshwater element and look at how we can create the best environment for these fish to thrive.
If they can't flourish in the rivers before they go out to sea, as a migratory fish, then we've failed them.
The health of our freshwater habitats is crucial to the long-term survival of all species. But today, freshwater stands as one of the most threatened ecosystems on Earth. Increasingly, research has shown that we must look at an ecosystem level to restore freshwater environments through holistic landscape scale restoration. With their unique ability to build and engineer, beavers can play a key role in regenerating freshwater ecosystems, and following their reintroduction, their population here in Britain is slowly rising. Once native to Britain, beavers evolved alongside our fish species, thriving for millennia until they were hunted to extinction over 400 years ago. Since their disappearance, we've witnessed widespread habitat destruction and biodiversity loss. Their felling of trees and dam building creates habitat, boosts biodiversity, and provides vital food for many species. But their reintroduction to Britain comes at a time when migratory fish are in a perilous state, and to some, the dams beavers build represent an impassable physical barrier to migrating fish.
The problem in our country with man-made structures, weirs, dams, we see many problems for fish moving around easily. One of my concerns is that widespread beaver introduction, certainly to the headwater streams, might exacerbate those problems for our native fish communities.
Beavers in the right place can have a really positive impact, but if they're in the wrong place, they can potentially have a negative impact on our freshwater fish populations and salmon populations.
I have experienced beaver introduction in various places, and if I'm honest, I've only heard negative things, but I also believe that beavers in the right place can do incredible things for that ecosystem.
Although they're both really important parts of the natural ecosystem, we don't really want to have one lost at the benefit of another. There needs to be that balance.
The natural world exists in a delicate balance, so as beavers return, bringing changes with them, we need to understand how this might impact our struggling fish populations. A release site nestled in a corner of Scotland offered a unique opportunity for researcher Dr. Rob Needham to conduct a long-term scientific study aimed at exploring and hopefully answering some of the questions surrounding fish and beaver interactions.
So the major interest with working with beavers is the habitat modifications which they do. They build dams, they build canals, they change habitats. Partly what my main interest was to see how these habitat modifications, how other species, how other taxonomic groups react to these changes in the environment. Beaver dams, each one of them are different. Each one is unique in shape and structure, size, length, height, everything. But what's important to factor in here is beavers will build a dam for a certain purpose. They'll raise the water level, and once they've got that water level to the height that's required for them, that's okay. So that water needs to find a way downstream. So more often than not, and in an environment where there is space for the river to connect with the floodplain, this water will form side channels round these dams, which ultimately form bypass channels for fish, particularly in high flows during autumn, when the majority of salmon and trout and other salmonids are actually moving upstream to spawn. You might look at a dam in the middle of the summer and go, oh my goodness, that's a complete barrier. But if these dams are given time to establish, and then we're going to see their ability to get round these natural structures.
Rob's research compared two very similar streams, one beaver modified and one where beavers weren't present. Rob and his team conducted a large-scale tagging study on the resident brown trout population. Over a number of seasons, they monitored the size and weight of individual fish, and by distributing detectors upstream and downstream over a series of dams, they were able to monitor the movement of tagged trout throughout the site.
The main findings that have come out of this study, we're seeing a larger number of larger fish, suggesting that these changes in the stream structure due to the construction of dams is providing habitat for a greater variety of age classes of trout. And also a really interesting fact that we found was that there were some fish which went over a dam and then they came back and they made multiple trips over the dams. And what was great was that we could see that once they'd passed a dam, the second or third or fourth time that they passed the same dam, they would do it much quicker. We've seen these massive changes in the volume of water, changes in aquatic vegetation. Certain areas are just full of dragonflies. The aquatic invertebrate life is phenomenal.
Invertebrates are the foodstuff many fish species rely on, but they too are suffering huge declines. The boost to invertebrate life brought by beavers could play a crucial role in improving the health of migratory fish in the freshwater stage of their life cycle. And the impact of beavers, witnessed by Rob and his team, transcend our waterways.
One of the biggest and most profound change was last year during the drought, where the vast majority of the country was brown, the grass was scorched, trees had burnt, but where there were beavers there was green and there was water.
The increase in water retention from beaver dams could be crucial in maintaining habitat for young fish during dry periods. By reintroducing deadwood into the ecosystem, beavers create environments where invertebrates flourish, providing an essential food source for juvenile fish and a space of refuge during times of environmental pressure. Much of the groundbreaking data gathered from Rob's study site is new information for Britain, but there are still knowledge gaps, particularly when it comes to beavers and Atlantic salmon. 70% of the world's population of Atlantic salmon return to the rivers of Norway to spawn, driving a thriving game fishing community renowned the world over. But they too are suffering declines.
Apart from danger to salmon at sea, the biggest problem that salmon have is, of course, the health of the rivers in which they spawn and which they spend time as par. Our salmon populations face many threats, but I've never even heard it said that beavers might be one of them. They occur throughout Norway now, and specifically they occur on 6 of the top 10 major salmon rivers of Norway and lots of the smaller ones. So we're used to having beavers and salmon living together for decades now, and it's simply the fact that we have no perceived problem with them. Well, in fact, the beaver populations on one of the rivers where it was studied went up at the same time that the salmon populations were going up. A few years ago, I managed to get Dr. Rachel Mallison, who is a salmon researcher and has worked also on beavers in North America, to come here for 2 years to study beavers and beaver dams and salmon movement in Norway. The concerns in Britain were instrumental in obtaining the funding.
My goal was to really do a project on the ecology of the juvenile fishes and try and understand habitat use and food availability, but a lot of the work really focused on the movement of those fishes. So we tagged fish, we put antennas above and below beaver dams, and then for the control sites, we went about a similar distance away from the main river, and we called that mid-reach, and then we put antennas above and below mid-reach. So what we found, importantly, is that the dams don't block the movement, so the juvenile fish are able to move upstream and downstream of the dams, and they're present above and below the dams. But the dams did modify how the fish moved, and the biggest difference was that there were just less repeated upstream and downstream movements in the sites with beaver dams compared to the control sites. I think it's important not to just paint it in a completely positive, happy light, though, and say that there will be no challenges, because that's not the case, right? The system will change, things will be different, but overall, from an ecological perspective, the overall benefit to the system should be positive. It's important to remember that beavers and salmon and other fish have co-evolved and coexisted for millennia. And I think it's important to let these systems function like they should, and beavers are part of the landscape. If we have a chance to let them function in a more natural state, then it's just going to be a benefit for so many different species. And there's so many connected pathways in rivers and streams and the surrounding riparian zones that it's really hard for us to mimic what nature does already.
This understanding that letting nature take the lead might yield faster and more enduring results when it comes to restoration of rivers and declining fish populations is something that Dr. Nick Bowes wanted to explore and led to him undertaking a pioneering landscape scale study in the US.
A lot of streams throughout the world have been degraded, in part because of the human activities we've done to remove a lot of elements that make them healthy. So if we think about what streams looked like thousands of years ago, streams were really complex. They had floodplains. They had beaver dams. We had trees, and trees would fall into the stream. And all that structure in the stream would move that water around and create new channels and spill water out under the floodplain during high flows. In Bridge Creek, there was massive incision about a century ago, in part due to the removals of beavers, the removal of a lot of large woody material out of the trees that used to be along the stream side. We had a large storm event and the whole thing just downcut really rapidly. And when the stream downcuts, it becomes simplified, and as the level of the stream gets lower, the water table gets lower. And as the water table gets lower, the vegetation no longer has access to that water table. And then the vegetation that's surrounding the stream starts to die, and the stream destabilizes even more.
So how can beavers play a role in restoring an incised stream? With their innate urge to build, beavers will dam narrow trenches during low flows. During high flows, these dams can wash out, which then helps to widen the trench, allowing a floodplain to begin to form. As the stream widens, the flow slows, allowing beavers to build wider, more stable dams. As the dams begin to trap sediment, this provides nutrients for vegetation, and as they begin to establish, the water table rises, allowing the stream to reconnect to its former floodplain. Eventually, a complex habitat of beaver dams, live vegetation and dead wood slow the flow even further, raising the ground level and creating a more resilient habitat that is much wetter and better able to cope with extremes in weather and temperature. With a strong belief that the way in which beavers engineer could play a crucial role in the restoration of Bridge Creek, Nick and his team embarked on a landscape-scale restoration project. In its incised state, the flow of the water in Bridge Creek would not allow beaver dams to persist, so they set about creating an environment in which dams could establish. Together they worked tirelessly to install over 120 structures called beaver dam analogues throughout Bridge Creek. The hope was that the volume of structures installed would begin to slow the flow of water enough to allow beavers to move in and continue the work they'd begun. Almost immediately, the success of the project was evident as beavers began to establish dams, and today there are over 200 beaver dams throughout Bridge Creek.
Throughout the study, we tagged over 100,000 fish, and we could track their movement, we could track their survival rates, we could figure out their abundance. And we saw that there was no change in the movement patterns when we went from 20 dams to over 200 dams. We saw a 50% increase in their survival rate, and we saw almost a 200% increase in the abundance of fish. We didn't see an increase in water temperature. We actually saw a cooling of the water, because as the water rises, it creates a lot of pressure and pushes water out into the banks and mixes with the groundwater, and that water is cooler and it comes down upstream colder. We go from a system that was dominated by large cobble Then we put these speed bumps in, and that slows water down, and so some material starts to get deposited as we move downstream as the water slows. And some of that is piles of gravel. And then, yeah, at the dam where the water is almost not moving, we get the fine sediment. So now we get patches of fine sediment, patches of gravel, patches of cobble. All these are important for different life stages of fish. So we need gravels for spawning, we need cobbles for small fish to hide behind when they're feeding. And it's not just about the fish. There are a whole host of wildlife that uses these now restored systems. Climate change is, to me, very scary, and it's a big deal. We need to build resilience into these systems. In the western US, we have a lot of wildfires, and so keeping these areas around the streams really wet, we can prevent them from burning as easily. So we have resilience to fire, we have resilience to drought, we have resilience to floods. I was just kind of blown away about how big of an impact beavers can have on stream ecosystems.
There's a huge amount we can learn from these overseas studies. And as our story here in Britain unfolds, and there are still questions to answer, this offers opportunities for continued and exciting research. James MacArthur is a PhD student assessing how beavers might be impacting the upstream distribution of migratory fish at a catchment scale. As organisms move through water, they're constantly shedding genetic material. This is referred to as environmental DNA. By gathering water samples from a range of sites, James is using this environmental DNA to identify the presence of a whole host of species, and by revisiting sites over a number of years, he can monitor any potential changes caused by beaver activity.
So in the first case of this study, we've collected sites from 163 sites across Scotland. In terms of gaining the status quo, we can look at the overall ecosystem impact and looking at how beavers downstream is potentially impacting or restricting upstream distribution right now. But we also have a subset of sites within this where we're looking at the individual possibility of dams. So we carried out a small-scale environmental DNA survey on an enclosure site in Scotland, and we saw striking differences in the community composition between the beaver site and the control site, where we saw roughly 1/3 more insects in total in terms of number of species. We saw a notable increase in the number of beetles, in caddisflies, in mayflies, and finally in true flies. I think restoring the natural channelization of river systems and actually allowing rivers to develop on their own is one of the most important things we could do. And that's one of the things that beavers are brilliant for. We allow deadwood to stay in these river systems and it'll create habitat for invertebrates, and that'll then create food for the trout and the salmonids. And that's one of the most important things about this. It's not looking at it as just it's a whole ecosystem. It's a cog. It's a bit like a watch almost in terms of each part joins together. And that's one of the things we need to restore each individual part to allow it to then function as the whole body. I'm really excited. There's so much research going on. There's so much work going on, and it's a really exciting time in terms of the amount of stuff that's going on and the pressure we're under, but pressure prompts the change as such, and that's one of the things that's really special about this, is that it's the time to be involved in this sort of research and it's the time to act now.
But in order to move forward, we need to find a way to come together.
They will, in many places, produce enormous beneficial changes. They'll create that physical diversity that leads to ecological diversity, more places for plants and animals to live. But in order to do that, they have to be managed.
It has to be a malleable system. It can't just be one size fits all. We have to be able to actually, if there is an issue, if there's a particular dam that's a problem, if there's a clear change or reduction in the salmon population, we need to be able to alleviate this.
It's important that we can demonstrate to stakeholders, landowners, that there are tried and tested management and mitigation methods that have been conducted in North America and Europe and Scandinavia. So there are solutions to problems which might arise. It's just we need to decide, are we willing to share our landscape with this species?
At a time when we know that our migratory fish are very threatened, we have got to do something big and fast, and beavers offer us a big help in that.
I have hope that we can turn this around. With the prediction that salmon could be gone from Scotland within 20 years. There's absolutely an urgency here to act now.
It's vital that we all come together. Pretty much everyone in the country uses our waterways for something. It's the most vital and important thing that I think this country has to tackle.
Having worked in rivers all my life, I'd really like to think that we would have changed direction in terms of restoring rivers before I'm gone. And that's why I still work voluntarily. I think it's really important, so the most important thing I do in my life. I am an optimist and I am hopeful. I think we understand enough to do it better, and I'm hopeful we will do so.
I'm an eternal optimist, and I see every day examples of steps forward. I guess my plea would be that everybody that is working for our environment does so together.
We've seen the heartbreaking decline of many of our fish species and freshwater habitats across the world. But we've also witnessed nature's incredible resilience and power to recover when given the chance. Now is the time for us to come together, to use our knowledge and experience to fight to restore balance in our natural world. If we can harness the restorative power of beavers, whilst also protecting and preserving migratory fish populations, we carry the hope of leaving a legacy of recovery for the next generation.